It's Ted Padromo, and it's Tuesdays with Ted. This is where I interview people, interesting people I come across on LinkedIn or through networking events. And Shawn and I, we met through a networking event, didn't we?
We had someone introduce us through a networking event. Yeah.
Right. So this is Shawn Richards, and we're going to talk about high-performing teams today. Shawn, you
Yeah.
want to give us a little bit of your background before we jump into the interview?
Sure. Happy to do that. My name is Shawn Richards. I live here in the great state of Utah, but I'm actually a natural born Oregonian from Oregon. So I'm a transplant here, came here to go to school and thought, well, I'll go to school here, but I won't stay. I'll go somewhere else and see the country. And 30 years later, I'm still here. So that tells you a little something. But I work as a business consultant. I help individuals and entrepreneurs start, grow, and scale businesses. And part of that scaling process is developing really good teams. And so that has become a big passion of mine. And that's why I've kind of made a pursuit, you might say, of having a curriculum of sorts to help leaders and teams become as high performing as they possibly can. So, yeah, that's exciting.
It's a really hot topic these days with the whole economy and everybody's quitting their jobs and working remotely and hybrid, and it's just
Right.
really
New
evolving.
new times, new challenges. Absolutely.
Yeah. So what are some of the biggest challenges you see with this hybrid workforce these days?
We have a lot of folks that are trying to figure out how to work together in that hybrid format. For a lot of years, of course, people were working together in a close proximity. But if we want to look for some silver linings that are coming out of the pandemic, one of those is that we were kind of forced to learn how to work together in a hybrid environment where some people are close and together in person and some were remote. And we're now seeing some opportunities for people around the world to join companies and be part of teams where you don't have to be in person. I still say that if possible, in person is best, but that's not always going to be the case, the situation. And so learning how to do and create high performing teams in both the in person, both the exclusively remote and the hybrid of the two, really, really important.
I saw an interesting article last week. The hot new thing in offices is cubicles. I got. I
30
grew
years
up,
ago.
my whole career was we had a cubicle or you had an office.
Right.
And those tables, I did that for one company. You couldn't get anything done. There's like 8 people at a table. You can't talk on the phone. You have to go to a little phone booth to make a phone call. It's like, who thought of that?
It's an interesting evolution, isn't it, of how the workspace specifically about how we're working together. And some people like that the open office environment where they've got the other people right there and they can just immediately talk to them. But yeah, there's some drawbacks, isn't there? It's hard to talk and you have to kind of step aside, especially if it's a private conversation or something like that.
Everybody had headphones on too, so they weren't talking to anybody at the table.
All the employer wanted was just a place for a person to sit, a chair. That's all they needed. So,
Right.
but yeah, it's interesting. I like the idea of it coming back to the cubicle because at least you've got a little bit of a spot there where you can kind of call your own. But
Dilbert's in heaven. More fodder for the Dilbert cube.
no kidding, no kidding.
So you were talking about the triad of high performing teams. Tell me more about
Yes,
that.
Triad. Yes, it's an interesting word. It makes it sound like it's coming out of a Star Trek episode or something sometimes because it's an interesting word, triad. The actual definition of triad is a group of 3 closely related compounds or elements, and that just really fit well for this idea of a high performing team. There are 3 elements that you've got to have, and they have to be integrated. They're not silos. You have to be able to integrate them. The first one is high productivity. You just got to be able to get things done. That makes a lot of sense. And that's where most teams and companies and leaders have focused over the years, is getting things done and everything from the KPIs and all that kind of stuff, but getting things done. And that's important, certainly. But what's started to come out of more research and study and application is also a positive culture and really establishing a culture of being able to communicate, psychological safety, inclusion, a lot of other elements that help people feel like they can contribute in the best way possible. And then the third element is confident leadership. And I'm going to challenge the traditional definition of leadership just a little bit, because in my view, a successful team has to have a leader that has an idea of what to do and how to bring out the best in their people and in their team. Because it isn't just about the old-fashioned command and control, as we call it, where the leader says, the people do, and everybody has success. Things have changed, and we need to be able to adapt and allow people the opportunity to contribute in new ways and much more productive ways that helps the whole team in a lot of different ways. And we can go as deep as you want into this in our chat today. But those are the three elements: high productivity, positive culture, confident leadership.
I think a lot of that comes from trust too. I had a boss, an ultimate micromanager. Yeah. And he would literally go stand over your cubicle and watch you work.
Yeah. That's kind of the epitome of command and control, making sure it's done a certain way, regardless of the outcome. They want it done a certain way.
Right.
And what we're finding is that there are more and more opportunities for people to kind of infuse their own way of thinking, their own way of doing it, in a way that still yields a good result, the desired outcome, but it also gives them an opportunity to do it in a way that's productive in their mind, allows them to use their strengths and contribute. And in a lot of cases, this is the fun part, they come up with new ideas as a result of doing that. In a good, positive way, they kind of challenge the way that it's been done and say, is there a better way? Mm-hmm. And by bringing what they can to the table and to the team, you can often find some innovative ways to get the same result in a more efficient manner, and in a lot of cases, a more profitable manner as well.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of things to be done, but you don't have to do them all in that 8 to 5 window of hours. You can get it done at 9 at night, maybe, if it works better for you. As long as you get the work done, it doesn't matter when you do it.
Right. And this kind of goes to part of that execution and culture, which is really good communication and being able to help establish, okay, this is the outcome that we need, and this is when we need it by. And then everybody having that alignment to make sure that it's being done on time. But you're absolutely right, Ted. There's some opportunity within that framework to have some flexibility, to let people do it at a time when it's best for them, in a way that's best for them, and still hit the target, the deadline, whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish. And that's where we have a lot of leaders that struggle, quite honestly. They are not quite so sure about giving people that flexibility. And you said that really important word a few minutes ago, and that was trust. And that does take some time. You have to kind of build up the trust. But there are ways to do that from both the leader's perspective and the team member's perspective, where, again, working together as a team, you can accomplish that and build that trust and accelerate that trust so that you get the desired outcome on both points. The productivity, it's getting done, and it's doing it in a way that people are excited. They love being part of the team. It feels like they're contributing in ways that are comfortable and confident for them. So there's a lot of benefits to doing it that way, as opposed to this strict command and control, do it this way. Now, certainly there are some occasions where you do need to have a little bit of command and control.
Yeah. Because
there may be safety, there may be regulations, company policies. There are different things where they do need to be done a certain way. And if you're the leader, ideally you're communicating the whys behind those steps so that the person can understand within the framework why they need to do it that way, and maybe see some opportunities to make some changes. But they have to be a little bit more careful as the team member to follow those instructions carefully. But yeah, there's definitely some opportunity to blend the command and control and the more servant leadership type of leadership.
Yeah. I always did best when the boss said, hey, here's what you got to do. Go do it. And then just check in with you maybe at the end, towards the end when it's due.
Yeah. And that's a great point. I appreciate you bringing that up, because you can't just leave people till the very end, the deadline. And that frequent communication, and that's a loose term, frequent. It might mean weekly to one person. It might be daily to another person. And
right.
Depending on the scope of the project, it may be less frequently for someone else. And that's, again, where that leader needs to really get involved with each member of the team, because it may be different. You may have Sally that says, I prefer a weekly check-in. And you may have David that says, I prefer a monthly check-in. And still a third person that says more frequently than weekly would be helpful. And
Once an
so
hour.
there's, say that again.
Once an hour.
Once an hour. So, more of the babysitting, but yeah, we can, whatever it takes. But that's part of the servant leadership style, is to work with each person individually, kind of that one by one, and understanding what helps them to be most effective. Because again, a common mistake that leaders make is they try to treat everybody the same. And
Yeah.
that can really put a drag on the team, because not everybody is operating at their optimal level if they're all being treated exactly the same. So some opportunities there to kind of think about, well, how does this person approach this situation? Or how frequently do I need to meet with this person to help them be productive?
Right. And what about tools like Slack and other project management tools? Are they effective in building teams?
Absolutely. It's like many other things. If we get too dependent on technology, it can be a detraction, because, again, some people are going to be more drawn to that and other people less. And so when it comes to productivity, technology is a really good tool. When it comes to culture, perhaps less so. That doesn't mean there isn't a place for technology in building positive culture in a team, but you have to be a little bit more kind of the hands-on, a little bit more of the touchy-feely, connecting with people, communicating directly with them. But you can use those tools. You can send a direct message via Slack and say, "Hey, Ted, how you doing today? How was your weekend? I understand you had a little family challenge over the weekend. Is there anything I can help you with?" Simple things like that. You can do that over a direct message, over text, a phone call, an email. Those kinds of things you can use to help build up that culture and that genuine concern. But it's always going to be ideal, if you can, to do it face to face if possible.
Pick up the old phone and make a phone
Sure.
call.
Have a conversation. Even something like this, just jumping on a quick Zoom call to see how somebody's doing can be helpful.
Right. Yeah, I remember one time we had to document our work, and they wanted to, if you wanted more employees, you had to justify all the work you were doing. So they had help desk software. And literally you'd spend half your day logging all the work you did. So you really cut your productivity down. We're like, this is ridiculous.
Yeah, that's a tough one. It's because you're right. You're going to have those leaders and those companies that want a lot of check-in and a lot of reporting, because more than likely they're using that technology to track productivity, and not just the employee, but in the project and in the company objective. And so it's hard to tell them not to do it, but you're right. It can really cut into accomplishing other things as a team or as an employee if you're spending so much time on the technology trying to report back. It's a great point.
It felt like Big Brother too. Like they wanted to see if we really were working. We're like, we're
Right.
working our butts off.
Yeah. Well, you spent, yeah, like you say, you spent half your time trying to report on what you've been doing. And
Right.
that's what goes back to trust again, that you talked about.
Yeah. It's a big factor. How do you get people to trust others? If you see a manager not trusting his employees, do you help him find ways he could trust them?
Yes. And that's usually kind of a coaching style, whereas that person's leader, it's talking to them and saying, how are some ways, or what are some ways that you can help someone on your team be a little more productive, and helping them see that there may be some artificial restrictions that they're putting around their employees and around their team, because they're perhaps micromanaging a little bit too much. And if you're the leader and you're having a harder time trusting your team members for whatever reason, well, I should probably qualify that. You should try to identify the reason. Is it because there's been a history there of failure in your definition? Is it because you're just not sure if other people are going to do it exactly like you want to do it? Then you have to kind of unpack that a little bit more and say, well, does it have to be done the way that Shawn, the leader, wants it done, or are there some alternatives that are acceptable? And you have to kind of determine case by case what that looks like. But meanwhile, you also have to have the willingness of the person, the employee, to take those steps. And some people are not. Some people want the micromanagement. That's a safe place for them. But that doesn't help them grow. And that's where the leader has to be willing to say, what can we do to create that psychological safety that is part of positive culture? It's to create a safe place for them psychologically, where they feel comfortable and confident in sharing ideas, in trying to do something on their own that maybe they're not comfortable doing, and knowing that they're not going to get fired or chewed out or something like that if it doesn't go exactly as planned. And that's how you build trust. And it does take time. It does take time. Some people, they're going to bond really quickly and build that trust almost immediately. Others, it takes a little bit more time.
Yeah. I remember times where if somebody, you get a new job and you come in and they teach, here's how we do this. And they teach you a certain way to do it. Then you say, well, what if we did it this way? It's like so much easier for me to do it this way. And say, well, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah. And for a new employee, if you're new to a team, or even if it's in the same company, but you're on a different team, maybe you've been promoted or moved over or transferred or something, you have to feel that out a little bit. And if you are kind of that brave employee, you might be willing to ask some questions. I have tried to encourage over the years the employers and the employees to ask better questions during the interviewing process, even before they're hired, to explore a little bit how that would look and to ask questions like, define psychological safety. What does that look like for you if you're the interviewer? And quite frankly, even the interviewee can also ask the same kind of a question. Do you promote or nurture a psychologically safe place? And if you get a quizzical look from the interviewer, you know that they're probably not even thinking about that. And so that might be a hint as to whether or not this is the type of team or company that you want to go work for.
Yeah.
It's up to you, of course. You have to make that decision. But there are some really good questions that you can ask during the interviewing process to help determine if culture is a fit. Most people, most interviewers in companies, they're looking for a certain skill set, and that fits nice and neat into that productivity that we talked about. But rarely do the interviewers talk about the culture part of what's going on in the company. And this is what we do to help you. This is what we do. We have development programs to help you both personally and professionally. We have team meetings so that you feel like you're a part of the team, whatever it is. There's lots of different things that contribute to positive culture. But the leaders need to demonstrate that, and the interviewers have an opportunity to demonstrate that as well.
Yeah, I remember when I worked in the tech arena, it was like, moving 1,000 miles an hour. You just had to get stuff done. So there weren't a lot of rules. Then I went to work for IBM, and it's like, oh my God, this is like a dinosaur moving in snail's pace.
Right. And that's part of what, every individual, every employee is a little bit different. And some like the fast pace, just get things done. That fits more into their idea of success. And others like the more creative part where they can create and they can contribute with ideas, but that slows it down a little bit. And so that's part of the challenge. And that's why dynamic leadership is so important. You've got to be able to adjust and adapt to the needs of the company as well as the needs of your team members so that you're not leaving people behind by going too fast, but you're not slowing others down by going too slow. So it's an interesting challenge.
I didn't last long at IBM. No.
You prefer the faster paced, obviously.
Right. I read this, some companies are starting to experiment with a 4-day work week, just 32 hours. And they say productivity is actually way up for these experiments they're doing. You've heard anything about that?
A little bit. And it's kind of the same. I hope I don't sound like a broken record, but it kind of depends on the company. It depends on the department. There are some departments, a customer service or something like that, that's just not going to ever be an option. Yeah. And so once in a while, you have a little bit of a debate within a larger company because you've got one part of the company where it's an option to go 4 days and the other one, it's not an option. So you've got to find some ways to help those that don't have that option to have some kind of a flexibility. I know that for some, they're here in where I live in Utah, the city, it's called Eagle Mountain, but they experimented with a 4-day work week. In fact, the whole state did a long time ago, about 10 years ago. And there was a lot of mixed feelings because for some, it was really helpful to have that 1 day a week that they could be running errands during the workday and some of those kinds of things. But they also expressed that how difficult it was when it came to things like childcare, because now they were having to leave earlier and come home later. So whatever money they felt like that they were saving by not having to commute on that 5th day, they were losing with expanded childcare hours and having to pay for that. And in some cases, the babysitter was too early to be coming in. They had to be coming in at 7 a.m. and staying until 6. That was too long. And so you had some interesting challenges there. I personally kind of like the idea of the 4-day work week, but I do think that more than anything, I'm more of my style, if I were to approach it this way, is a little bit more on the let's figure out what works best for our team, and maybe even down to the individual, whether it's working together, all together throughout the same days of the week, same hours of each day, or whether it's simply giving them the flexibility to say 4 days this week, 5 days the next, whatever the situation may be. Because there are some people that would prefer the 4 day and want the 3 day weekend to be with their families, but others it doesn't work as well. So
Mhm.
it's interesting. It's an interesting idea, though. I'm curious to see where it's going to go over time.
Yeah, these companies are actually doing just 32 hours a week, so they don't have the 10-hour days.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm glad you clarified. There
Yeah.
are some that are finding that it may be a little bit better and they can retain their employees a little bit longer by allowing a little bit more flexibility and only requiring more or less 32 hours. And then they hire an extra employee or two to take care of the extra work that would be needed. It again, same kind of a thing. It'll be interesting to see what people are willing to do.
Yeah. Like I see with my kids, a lot of times they have to like log into an app at a certain time of day. My wife did that as a nurse practitioner. She had to go to the phone and punch in like a time clock, and they monitored everything they did all day long.
Oh,
And there's no breaks. Like, back in the day, we could actually take a 5-minute break or a 10-minute break.
right.
You weren't always 100% productive, or now they want you to be productive every minute of every day.
Yes. You and I, when we were getting acquainted here a few weeks ago before today's event, we were talking about this quiet quitting concept. And I think some of that is it's a gentle, quiet rebellion, you might say, because they're saying, look, if you're going to have me working nonstop throughout the day at this ultra high productivity rate, then come 5 o'clock, I'm done.
Yeah.
And that's the end of my day. I've given you what we've promised, what we've agreed to. There's other things in life. I'm going to go do those. And so, yeah, there's some interesting dynamics that are coming out of what's happening here in recent years.
Yeah. I feel like a slacker in the old days, remember? We didn't
Well,
have
and that,
computers.
it's funny because back in my day as a young person coming into the workforce back in the 90s, you had kind of the water cooler talk, and you were usually talking about what was on TV the night before, and whether it was the Seinfeld or Friends episode, whatever it was. But there was kind of this water cooler talk, and that was you chatted for a while and you got to know each other, and you don't see that quite as much now. You don't see it quite as much. I think people still have a desire to do that, to connect with the people at work, but to me, it feels like they're also kind of saying, yeah, but come 5 o'clock, I'm ready to now go be with either family or other friends that are outside of work. So yeah, it is a little bit of a different feel. I'm not, because I'm a consultant now, I'm not quite in the workforce like I was 30 years ago, but it's an interesting, as I interact with clients and whatnot, it's interesting to listen to them talk about different situations.
Yeah, they're pushing us to our physical and mental limits, literally.
Yes.
As people are starting to crack.
Yep. And with what's going on, pressures in the world today, work related or not, people are looking for some relief.
Yeah.
And I think the pandemic opened our eyes a little bit as to what's possible. And some of this next generation of the workforce is starting to realize maybe we can do things a little bit differently and still get good results. So again, very interesting to see what this Gen Z workforce, and even the millennials a little bit, but what they're going to do going forward.
Yeah, like all the tech companies had all the games and the ping pong tables and meditation rooms.
Which they found were not as productive. It was, people hardly using them. And so it created this sense of almost this false sense of we care about you, and we want you to have some recreation. But then you actually get into the workplace and you realize there's a reason why when I was walking around during the interviewing process, nobody was playing.
Right.
They have them there. It looks kind of cool, but nobody's actually doing it because there's some pressure there to produce.
Yeah, when I worked at Cellular One, late 80s, we had 40 employees at the time, and we had an espresso machine, a real one, one of the big ones. And that was like the biggest perk.
Huge. It was huge.
Just made us work more because we were always on high caffeine.
Right. And I've seen, back in the day, and I still see this once in a while in different establishments. If you go around, you see like a soda machine or something like that, where they can go get a drink and just fill up. You see some of that. But yeah, I'm not hearing as much anymore, especially out of tech companies, of doing game rooms and things like that. They have more collaboration rooms where they allow people to get together and just, collaborate, talk, idea share, brainstorm, all those kinds of cool things.
And they're starting to come back to the office. And
yeah, I think that's another part of the pandemic that has been interesting, is that people are starting to realize how much they do value being around other people
Yeah.
and having that proximity, and to some degree how much more effective it can be. Now, again, you've got kind of both sides there, but you have folks that are kind of what I call the headphone people, where they, or the AirPods or whatever, they've got their earphones or AirPods or whatever they're using these days, and they just kind of like to listen to their music and just hunker down and do their thing.
Right.
And then you have others that are a little bit more drawn to the interaction with coworkers and a little bit more kind of the relationship based. And for them, work is a little bit different.
Yeah. I see the people in the coffee shops too. They want to be around other people, but they're tuned into their world.
They want to be able to listen to their music, and then when they're ready, talk to someone else.
Right. For 1 second. No.
Right. Just hi, how's it going?
We're all introverts here when we're programming, right?
Yeah, in some places, yes, very much so.
Yeah. So this has been very interesting, Shawn. So where do you kind of see what's next? Are you kind of, there's so much going on, and they're really trying to get people back to the offices. You got teams all over the world, literally, you're managing.
Yep.
Uncharted territory.
It really is. And ironically, going back to this idea of positive culture and creating an environment where you can brainstorm, that's where it's going to be really interesting to see what happens going forward, because the companies, in my opinion, the companies that embrace psychological safety and culture are going to win out, because they're giving their employees an opportunity to have a voice, to share ideas, to collaborate, to innovate, not just with product and company execution, but with the environment. And hey, we think it can work this way. We think that if we were to get together a couple of times a year in some type of a fun environment, that's sufficient. The rest of the time we can be hybrid. Another company may have a different approach, but I think there's going to be some really neat and exciting ideas come out of this new way to approach the workplace.
Yeah, I'm kind of getting the sense you're saying keep your finger on the pulse of your employees, listen to them, make an open dialogue, like what's working best for you.
Absolutely. Keep in touch with your employees. Keep talking to them on a regular basis. This idea of an annual review, it's okay to have, I suppose, a formal review once a year, but that cannot be the only time you're talking to your people. You have to be checking in at least weekly and just seeing how they're doing. And because we all do this throughout the course of a 12-month year. And so you have to be checking in. How are they doing? What ideas do they have? How's work going? How's the productivity? Where are you struggling? How can I help? All of those questions need to be far more frequent than the once a year check-in.
Yeah. So what's your website, Shawn, so people can get in touch with you?
Well, thank you. It's blueskybiz, B-I-Z, consulting.com. I'd be more than happy to have a conversation with anyone if you have some ideas on teams. I also have a podcast called the Team Engagement Podcast. You're welcome to check that out and listen to see what I always have leaders come on as guests and share ideas about teams and leadership. So yeah, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today, Ted.
And you can connect on LinkedIn. What a concept.
Yes, definitely. Yep. I'm a very friendly guy. So if you reach out and want to connect, I'll connect. So
great. Well, thanks for your time, Shawn. This has been great.
Well, thank you, Ted. I appreciate, again, the opportunity to come join you. I've always enjoyed our conversation. So I look forward to more in the future.
Thanks.